Hey Pennsylvania, it's wine o'clock on Wine Time PA. Join Rob, Holly, and Steve as they explore their home state of Pennsylvania and all the wonderful wineries it has to offer. Each month, they take a journey tasting the wines of PA. If you're able, pour a glass of your favorite wine and join us now for Wine Time.
Welcome again to Wine Time PA. I'm one of your hosts, Rob, and today I'm joined with my co-host, Steve.
Hey.
And Holly.
Hello, hello, hello.
In this episode, we'll be talking about Flickerwood Wine Cellars. The three of us will discuss our experience with our visit as well as the wines we tasted. We visited the winery in February of 2024, so any information we shared is based on our time of the visit and our personal experience. While this was our first time visiting the winery, we have all had some experience with the wines in the past. In fact, I visited their second tasting room years ago when it was located in Kennett Square, though it is now located in Oxford. And on that note, Steve, why don't you give our listeners some information about Flickerwood Wine Cellars?
Sure. Flickerwood Wine Cellars first opened in 2000 in Kane, Pennsylvania, which is in north-central Pennsylvania, about 25 miles south of Bradford and 20 miles north of Johnsonburg. They also have a second tasting room, as Rob had mentioned, in Oxford, since they changed from Kennett Square. That's about 1 hour west of downtown Philadelphia. They are open 7 days a week, but Monday through Thursday is noted for retail sales only. So if you do plan to go there for a tasting, try Friday through Sunday instead. And reservations aren't required for tasting, so feel free to just show up at your own leisure. And while Flickerwood doesn't actually grow their own grapes, they do get a bulk of their grapes from other Pennsylvania wineries, which is nice to keep it within the state. The grapes that don't grow so well in Pennsylvania, specifically your dry reds, they get from California instead. All of their fruit wines use the actual fruit and not just flavoring.
Great. Well, thank you for that information, Steve. Holly, why don't you give us a little bit of information about the aesthetics of the tasting room itself?
Sure thing. You'll notice when you're in the area and you're heading to the winery, you're going to see a lot of signs that mention that you're in the Allegheny National Forest. When you pull into the winery, the building, you're going to notice on the outside, really embraces this forest setting. It's a wood building, and it reminded me of a family cabin or a mountain lodge. When you walk inside, you're welcomed by the wine bottles right away, of course, as well as some merchandise for sale. You're in a room, and you'll notice that there's a small area for seating in that room. Behind that seating area is a second room. When you walk into that room, the first thing you notice is a gorgeous, huge window that takes up most of the back wall, and there's a bar in front of the window. There are a lot of tables in this room for seating, and I have to comment that I absolutely love those tables, and I would love one for Steve and I's house. There are these wine barrels that they use at the center of the table, but then they build a round table around it. They're taller, like a pub-style table, and they have these really nice, cushy, comfy chairs. I could have just sat there all day in those chairs and look at those tables. They were beautiful.
Yeah, I really enjoyed those tables. They were really unique. I haven't seen anything like that, and it really tied into a winery aesthetic.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It really did. And as far as the design or the style of the aesthetics inside of how they decorated it, it's kind of a combination of that cabin feeling and Italian vineyard. You get the cabin or lodge feeling from the wood floors, the ceilings, and some of the walls, and also in that room with the gorgeous window, there's this beautiful stone fireplace. On the other walls is kind of where you get that Italian vineyard feeling. Some of the areas have what looks like a hand-painted Italian-inspired vineyard scenes and villas. The rest of the walls have this, and I'm not sure if I'd call it wallpaper or something else. Either way, it's a design that sort of looks like stone or maybe stucco with these vintage wine labels scattered all over it. I'm probably not doing it justice, and it probably sounds a little eclectic, but overall it works. The place has a really cozy and casual feeling inside, which I think was nice since we were there in the winter.
In addition, if you visit there during the warmer climate seasons, they do have a big outdoor area that is free for you to use. They have a pavilion out back, and they do host two festivals there, Memorial Day weekend and Labor Day weekend, but it can be used throughout the rest of the summer as well for live music. The pavilion also does include a bar, and they do have some nice grassy areas to sit at or some tables that you can use in the summertime. In addition, out back they do have some additional parking because the parking was a little bit on the limited side out front. So Steve, Now that we've kind of explained what we can expect when you visit there, tell us about some of the wines.
Sure. At the tasting rooms, you can enjoy a glass or a bottle, or you can make a custom flight for yourself. Flights consist of 5 wines of your choice, and each is a generous 1-ounce pour. They offer 9 whites, 9 reds, 7 fruits, and a few other specialty drinks like hard teas and lemonades. One nice feature of their tasting sheets that you make your selections on is that they list the sweetness on a scale from 0 to 5. That can really help you dial in your personal tastes and try a variety from dry to sweet. Unfortunately for us, we chose to visit between seasons, which also meant they were sold out of about 6 wines and all of their hard teas and lemonades. So when we get to our personal tastes, remember that a few were unavailable, and you might want to give some of the ones we didn't mention a try for yourself, just in case it really hits your fancy.
Yeah, in fact, there was one in particular, Rosebud Red, that sounded amazing. We happened to be there with the vintner and got to talking with him, and he was telling us that this wine was a combination of, or a blend of a Merlot, a Cab Sauv, and it really made it sound like it was something I would enjoy, being as I like a lot of good dry red blends. So
Merlot!
So I'm going to have to make a point to visit them again, just to make sure I try the Rosebud Red again. Now, as far as pricing goes, they list their teas and lemonades around $7. Wines start around $12 a bottle, and they go up to about $30 a bottle. But if you're not into wine, fear not. They have you covered. Right, Holly?
Yes, they do. That big bar in front of that gorgeous window is not just for show. They offer a variety of drinks. They have a ton of liquors. They appear to have all of your standard spirits and mixers. They also had some fun specialty cocktail options, and it seems like these options change with the seasons. We were there in February, and their cocktail menu was dedicated to St. Patrick's Day with some delicious sounding drinks like Drunken Leprechaun and Emerald Island. If we'd not been there for wine, I was tempted to try one of those.
Absolutely.
And if you're not into spirits or wine, they also have beer. They had a couple of beers on draft, as well as a selection of around 10 bottles of beer. So overall, a really nice alcoholic selection. And if you're a designated driver or don't want to drink at all, don't worry, they have water and sodas available for you. As far as for food, it was a little limited when we were there on a Saturday. They had a charcuterie board and soft pretzels. We actually got the charcuterie board to share, and I thought it was delicious. They had a really nice variety of cheeses and meats, and there were even some surprise things like jalapeno-flavored Pringles, which sounded odd, but it worked really well on that charcuterie board, I thought.
Really tasty.
Yeah, I want to get a can of that for myself.
Yeah. And it does appear, according to their social media website, that they offer food on other nights of the week, such as pasta and grinders, though I'm not sure when they do it, if it's every week or consistently. It sounds like it's kind of special nights and you may require a reservation. So if that's something you're interested in, I would just maybe reach out to them for more information.
They also gave us a personal bowl of crackers at the table to snack on, as well as to help clean our palates between tastings. And in fact, those crackers were really good. They were like a sour cream and onion flavored, and they were very tasty. Mm-hmm. They also offered free popcorn in the front room, which I know I never will pass up if I get that chance. All right. Now it's time for the good stuff. Let's talk about the wines. While Flickerwood has many excellent wines, the three of us narrowed down our list to the top recommendations from this particular tasting. These are based on our personal taste and palates. As a reminder, you can learn more about our palates in the introductory episode if you haven't already listened to it. In a moment, we will give you our top 3 recommendations. However, we all agree when it comes to wine, drink what you love. One final reminder, we are not being paid or endorsed by Flickerwood or any wine group for our recommendations. These are our own personal experiences with the wines, which may vary even between the three of us. So Steve, why don't you give us your first recommendation?
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, my number 3 pick was their Moonglow. So this is a semi-sweet blend of Chardonnay and peach, which I kind of thought was very interesting when I first saw it on the tasting sheet. I'm not a huge fan of Chardonnay usually, but I'm always willing to give it a try, but I really love peach flavor. So this was right up my alley as something to give a shot and see what I thought about. The Chardonnay part was really nice because it really helped keep the sweetness of the peach down, so it didn't feel like the residual sugars were too high, and you were just drinking a glass of sugar. I really enjoyed peach, so being a little less sweet was actually a really refreshing component of this wine. It still had some sweetness, but it just wasn't as much as you would get in a peach fruit wine. The peach did have a strong presence, so I do recommend you like peach before you give it a shot. And if you're a Chardonnay fan, this is definitely a unique take, but the Chardonnay was a little subtle, so just be prepared for that.
My number 3 pick actually is a Chardonnay-inspired one as well, surprisingly enough. It's their Maple Vine. It's on their list as a specialty wine. It's listed as a white, and it has a 5 on the sweetness scale. The description says it's a Chardonnay sweetened with maple syrup. I almost didn't try it, and probably because all of you are thinking what I'm thinking, that is going to be way too sweet. I personally love maple syrup and maple products, but they tend to be very sugary and best in small doses. However, the woman working at the winery that day gave us a sample and was like, just try it. It was nowhere as sweet as I thought it would be. The person who gave it to us, the sample, basically said the same thing, that everybody who tries it is pleasantly surprised that it's not as sweet as they thought it would be. The Chardonnay is usually a dry wine, and I expected the maple syrup flavor to dominate the wine, but it didn't. It was more mild. It was very subtle. It kind of made me think of waffles when I drank it, and I wanted a bite of waffles. In fact, I think this should be a brunch wine. Everybody thinks of mimosas or Bloody Marys when it comes to brunch. I think it's time to start having wines at brunch, and this should be a brunch wine.
I completely agree. In fact, I thought the same thing. This wine almost made my number 3. The combination of that buttery Chardonnay flavor with that subtle maple taste in the finish just really reminded me of a pancake breakfast. I was very glad I tried it, and even though it sounded weird, I really liked that wine.
I have to agree with you, Steve. I'm not a big Chardonnay fan myself, but I gave this one a shot, and yes, it wasn't as overwhelming with that maple flavoring in there, and it actually was quite good, and it was a unique one, if nothing else. So even if you're not a big fan of Chardonnays, I would still give this one a chance because it is, if nothing else, unique.
Yeah, it's definitely a unique one. I agree with that. So what'd you pick, Rob, for number 3?
I went a little off of my normal likings for this one, and I know I've said this in the past, I'm hit or miss with these wines, but my number 3 pick is the rosé. It's a darker colored rosé than most rosés typically are. This had kind of a dark purplish red coloring to it. It smelled really sweet, almost like that Concord or Niagara, that classic grape smell you get. But when you actually start drinking it, it wasn't as sweet as the smell was, which made it really interesting. But it also finished on a drier note as well. This was listed as a semi-dry, but that fruit forwardness really kind of tricks you into thinking it's a sweeter wine than it really is. And remember, semi-dries, that just refers to the amount of residual sugar. It's not necessarily the fruit tastings you have in there. So I had a note here that said it was both sweet and dry, which is kind of unique and why I thought it was an excellent rosé, one that are usually hit or miss for me, but this one was a hit for me, and I enjoyed it, and it's my number 3 pick.
Yeah, I had put a note too that it was definitely a unique rosé, and I really enjoyed the floral notes in it.
Yeah, on that same note, Rob, I have to agree the rosés there were very interesting. In fact, my number 2 is the Ruby Z.
Good pick.
It's a semi-sweet blush blend of 3 different American grapes, and while I mentioned in the introduction I'm not a big fan of rosés, this one just sort of hit the spot. It didn't have some of those flavors that I don't really care for traditionally that you find in rosés with that little bit of skin contact. I just really like this wine for everything a rosé has to offer, but none of the things that I dislike from a rosé. This was a touch on the sweeter side, but also a bit low on the acidity, which is just kind of perfect for me. I can imagine enjoying a few glasses of this on a nice spring afternoon. My only complaint is that I didn't buy a bottle on our visit.
It's a good complaint to have.
Yeah. My number 2 pick is the Cab Franc.
Great pick.
It's a full body, dry red, and it was a number 1 on their scale of sugar stuff, so it's definitely dry. If you listen to the intro episode, I mentioned that I like fuller body reds, and Cabernet Sauvignon is one that I like a lot. Now, the Cab Franc grape is closely related to the Cabernet Sauvignon. I believe it's a parent grape to the Cabernet Sauvignon. Usually, I tend to like the Cabernet Sauvignon more, and I usually only drink the Cab Franc in a blend. However, I really like this one by itself. When I smelled it, I got notes of oak, smoke, and some spice, and I really liked that I could actually taste those aromas in the wine. Sometimes you don't always get what you smell in the wine. In this case, everything I smelled, I got in the flavor. I thought it had some really nice tannins, and then overall it was a good, solid dry red, and I could see drinking that with a variety of meals.
Yeah, so that was a great Cab Franc and one that almost made my list because it's not a wine that I typically choose, but that was an excellent Cab Franc, and I debated putting that on my list. However, I decided to go in a different route for my next pick. I went on a sweeter side, and that was the White Tail Red. This is their Fredonia wine, which they have listed as a 4.5 on that 0 to 5 scale. So it was on the sweeter side and usually a little sweeter than my likings. But this was an excellent Fredonia wine, which I've been craving Fredonia wines a lot lately. It had a gorgeous purple coloring to it. It had a really sweet smell to it. And when you tasted it, it was even sweet to even very sweet. But it was a lighter body, so that sweetness kind of got taken away from that lighter body, and it was more refreshing, and it was just a great example of a Fredonia grape and how you can make a great Fredonia wine. And it's something, if you're like, especially if you like sweeter wines, it's one that I would think is very easily drinkable, and especially a hot summer day. And it's my number 2 pick.
Yeah, I agree, Rob. This almost made my list as well. I really have started loving the Fredonia.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of a slightly lighter bodied Concord with all that fruit forward taste, but just that little bit of dryness sometimes in the finish and not quite so overwhelming in its, taste profile. I tend to really look for Fredonia now, and theirs was a really good example of one.
And so this leads us to our top picks from Flickerwood.
Drum roll.
And so for mine, this one for me is a great wine. It's one that I've loved for a really long time, that I've been familiar with this one for many, many years. It got some bonus points for sentimental values because it was one of those first wines that I really enjoyed and really loved when I first started drinking wine. And that is their Pink Catawba.
Not surprised.
Yeah, not surprised either. Rod's had me pick up a bottle for him as I pass certain local supermarkets that carry Flickerwood in the past.
There's usually a standing order. If you're going to be nearby there, grab me a bottle of that.
Yeah, so it's not a surprise that this is number 1.
What I really enjoyed about it was this was just a great example of a Pink Catawba. It had a really unique pinkish orange coloring to it. It was a medium bodied with hints of that acidity. So it was a nice balance between the fruit forward and acidity. And it was just very pleasant to drink. I really enjoyed drinking this on a hot summer day. If I'm just sitting outside in the evening with some friends like you guys or whoever. And it's just a really solid Pink Catawba and a very solid wine to easily drink. And it's my favorite from there.
Yeah, I think it's my mom's favorite too. She happened to join us for the tasting and nearly polished off the bottle herself.
I think I helped her a little bit, but yeah, she drank most of it.
Yeah, sorry, Mom.
Hi, June.
So my number 1 pick is the Kinzua Journey, which is a semi-sweet white blend. Now, the description mentions that it's kind of like a Moscato, so of course I had to try it.
Of course you did.
It did have some of those subtle tastes that did remind me of a Moscato, so I was very glad to try it with little bits of orange in both the fragrance and the taste, but it was just really smooth, and it had a touch less sweetness than most Moscatos, since it wasn't really a Moscato anyway. It was just a blend, but it also had a touch more acidity, and that combination of a little bit more acidity and a little less sweetness really just made this a nice drinking wine. One interesting thing that I noticed after buying the bottle and drinking it at home was I actually preferred to drink this after I let the wine aerate for just a bit and get a little contact with some oxygen, which is a little atypical of a lighter bodied white wine. So I kind of thought that was interesting, but it really helped bring out some of those more subtle flavors that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, you're right. Usually you think of airing wine more in the reds than you do the whites, but yeah. I remember you commenting about the flavors coming out more.
Yeah, and that was a little bit of an accident. I got a glass, got busy with the dog, came back, and it tasted a little bit better. So I tried it again the next time. I just wanted to say, too, Kinzua, you're going to hear that word in the area of Flickerwood a little bit. It's an old Seneca Nation of Indians word, and a lot of things are named after that when they used to occupy the land. One of the really interesting things nearby is the Kinzua Bridge State Park. So if you happen to go and visit Flickerwood, maybe put this on your list as something to visit. It was once the largest train trestle in the United States at over 300 feet tall and over 2,000 feet long. And it stood for more than 100 years until a tornado took it down. And they built a state park around it with some nice overlook. Some of the debris is down in the valley. Just, an interesting little side trip.
Yeah, I agree. We've been there ourselves, and I can attest it's a gorgeous state park, and I highly recommend considering visiting it if you're in the area. Okay, are you ready for my number one pick? I'm excited.
Go for it.
All right, I picked the Pinot Noir.
Ooh.
Yeah, very good.
So it's also a dry red. And if you listen to the intro, again, I don't typically drink Pinot Noirs. If somebody offers me a glass of one somewhere, I will try it gladly, but you never see me purchase a bottle or order at a restaurant. And one of the reasons is that Pinot Noirs tend to be lighter bodied. And as I'd mentioned, I like more medium and full bodied dry reds. This one was really smooth, light, with a nice fruit finish, especially with the black cherry and the berry in the finish. I also got some notes and pepper in it as well. It was rated a 1 on their scale of dry to sweet, but it did taste like a 1 to me. I don't know about you guys, but I felt it felt more like a 3 or something more in the semi range with as smooth as it was.
Oh, yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And I was actually, to be honest, I was torn between this and the Cab Franc between my number 1 and number 2. Because when we were there at the tasting, I kept trying to sip of the Pinot Noir and be like, ooh, I like that. And then with the Cab Franc, like, ooh, no, I like that more. And I think whatever I was drinking was my favorite wine of the day at that moment. But the reason I ended up putting this number 1 is because this is probably actually the first Pinot Noir I have come across that I would buy a bottle.
In fact, I tend to agree with you. I'm not a big Pinot Noir fan, but I bought a bottle of that and took it home because it was an excellent Pinot Noir, and it almost made my list as well because it was just that good. And I agree, it's not a 1 on the scale. It seemed more like a 2.5 or a 3 with that sweetness notes in there.
Yeah, I kind of mark that as a 2 for sweetness for me. The fruit forward and just it added a little bit extra. And I really like this too. And it really has me rethinking Pinot Noir, which has not always been one that's been high on my list, but this was an excellent version of one. And even if you don't like Pinot Noir, definitely give this a shot.
Well, there you have it, listeners. There's our top recommendations from Flickerwood Wine Cellars. But before we sign off for this episode, is there any other wines that you guys want to shout out in this episode?
Yeah, actually, I want to mention the Flickerwood Sunset. It was also a blush, and it was a 3.5 in their sweetness scale, so about a semi-sweet wine. They compared it to the White Zinfandel, which again is probably another wine I typically don't pick out on a menu. It was mentioned it was a blend of grapes, Niagara, Catawba, Diamond, and there was one more, but I didn't write it down fast enough. But those are 3 grapes that I like. It starts off a little dry, but then you get this punch of sweetness that I enjoyed. For me, it's probably more of an after-dinner drink or just a glass more for dessert than drink a lot of, but I still enjoyed this wine. I would recommend trying it if you're into sweeter blushes.
Yeah, and I would like to give a shout out to the Riesling. Riesling's right up my alley. Not a surprise, but this one was a little different. It didn't really have that overwhelming Riesling aroma or taste, but you could tell it was still a Riesling, but it had all these other unique and interesting flavors that I kind of enjoyed, like grapefruit with that fruit forward taste, which I haven't really found in a lot of Riesling. So I found that to be unique. And while it was a little drier, that little bit of sweetness in the beginning just really helped make this a nice wine to drink.
I'll give a shout out to the Pinot Grigio. I know, Holly, that's one of your favorite wines, but I found this Pinot was pretty good. I know I liked it because it wasn't as high of acidity as most Pinot Grigios were, but to me, I think that's what made it a little bit more enjoyable. So I thought the Pinot Grigio was pretty good.
For you, not Holly.
For me.
Actually, I do love a good Pinot Grigio, and the one reason it really didn't make my list at this winery is just because I enjoyed so much of the wines that I don't typically like at this winery. Again, that Pinot Noir, that Cab Franc, that White Zinfandel one. These are all wines that I don't typically drink, and I just was blown away by them here. And I think that's actually a good point that when it comes to wines, it never hurts to go outside your comfort zone and find what you might like out there, because you never know. Your tastes evolve all the time.
Yeah, and each of us picked a wine that is outside of our comfort zones that made our top 3. So this is a great place to experiment a little.
Yeah, a wide variety of different wines, from sweets to dries, reds to whites. Step out of your comfort zone, try something different, and you'll be surprised because these wines were fabulous.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of our picks. So, Holly, why don't you just mention some of their best sellers that they have?
Okay, great. So they had 2 sweet whites, the Grandview Niagara and the Chantilly White. They were a 5 on their scale, but sadly they were out of them when we were there that day, so we didn't get to try them. They also had the Sweet Angel Red and the Sleepy Hollow Red, which were also both sweet reds at a 5. The Ruby Z, which Steve talked about. And the last best-selling wine was the Flickerberry Dew. It's a sweet, dark red wine that is a blend of raspberry and blackberry. So that's probably one for you fruit lovers to check out.
Well, thanks, Holly. And Steve, why don't you tell us about some of their award-winning wines?
Absolutely. The tasting sheet mentioned that the Riesling was voted one of the top 10 wines in Pennsylvania, and the Grandview Niagara was a double gold winner at the 2019 Farm Show. And for those of you not aware, the Farm Show requires the grapes to be both grown and fermented in Pennsylvania for it to be entered into that show. So, Pennsylvania represent.
Woo-hoo.
We were also unable to get a full list of their other award winners, but we did see several bottles with medals on them that have won awards, such as the Whitetail Country Red and the Cab Franc. So when you take a visit there, if you're interested, just give them an ask, and I'm sure they'd be glad to tell you.
Well, there you go, listeners. There's our thoughts on Flickerwood Wine Cellars. It's a great winery tucked away near the Allegheny National Forest. They have a variety of wines ranging from bone dry to sweet, reds, whites, and blushes. They have a wonderful tasting room in Kane with a second tasting room on the opposite end of the state in Oxford, which is outside of Philadelphia. For more information, please visit their website, flickerwood.com, or you can find them on social media at Flickerwood Wine Cellars and Cocktail Lounge. Please check back on the first Wednesday of the month for our new winery. To find out which winery we will be talking about, please follow us on social media under Winetime PA. We will be sharing that information out there soon.
Thanks for listening to Wine Time PA with your host Rob, Holly, and Steve. We hope you enjoyed our take on Pennsylvania wineries and all that they have to offer. Please be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast. Also, be sure to follow them on social media for updates and news. Remember, when it comes to wine, drink what you love.